My name is Elise Hartman, and I was supposed to attend my brother's wedding tomorrow. But instead, I stood in my Aunt Maxine's living room staring at a wedding album open, real printed and finished. In those glossy pages, my brother Nolan was already married. The reception had happened, the cake had been cut, the dance floor had cleared. And not only had I missed it, I was never meant to be there. Elise, honey, I thought you knew. Aunt Maxine's voice cracked like glass behind me. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My hand trembled as I held a perfectly wrapped gift, a custom-cut crystal frame etched with their wedding date, June 15th. Tomorrow. But tomorrow was a lie. The frame slipped from my fingers, shattered. The sound echoed in that quiet room like a scream no one dared let out. Shards of glass caught the sunlight, scattering like the hope I had held on to for too long. That's not possible, I whispered. I have the invitation right here. My fingers scrambled through my purse, pulling out the heavy cream envelope. My name was written in gold calligraphy. June 15th. Tomorrow. I showed it to her like evidence in a trial I hadn't prepared for. She took it with trembling hands. Her eyes softened with something worse than pity. Elise, the wedding was last weekend. They sent you the wrong date, on purpose. I forgot how to breathe. I had requested time off from my job as executive marketing director to be there. I had searched weeks for the right dress, for something elegant but not showy, something that whispered, I belong. I'd even practiced how I'd smile through the tension at seeing relatives who hadn't called me in years. And now I realized they had rehearsed my absence. My mind flashed back to the day Nolan announced the engagement. His gaze had swept the dinner table but skipped over me like I didn't exist. Still, I had smiled, congratulated him, pretended it didn't hurt. And when I received that invitation, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the olive branch I had waited years for. It wasn't. It was a trap designed with cruel precision to avoid the discomfort of my presence, to erase me without having to say it aloud. I knelt down on the floor, carefully picking up the shards of the broken gift. Aunt Maxine moved to help, but I shook my head. Let me? My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. Something had cracked inside me, but not like glass. Like earth. Like tectonic plates shifting after years of suppressed pressure. They've always treated me like I was invisible. Now they've just made it official. And for the first time in years, I didn't try to soften the blow. I didn't look for an excuse to protect them from their cruelty. Something inside me finally broke free. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, if you've ever unwrapped rejection dressed as tradition, leave a like and stay with me. There's more to this story, and I promise the ending will surprise you. Because tomorrow I'm not going to a wedding. Tomorrow I'm walking straight into the heart of a truth they never wanted to face. And I won't be invisible anymore. The drive back to my apartment felt like a blur. Red lights, green lights, city streets I'd driven down 1,000 times suddenly seemed unfamiliar, foreign, like I'd been dropped into someone else's life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the driver's seat, the wedding invitation still clenched in my hand like some twisted souvenir from a life that never wanted me. I placed it on my kitchen counter beside the gift wrap that now held only broken glass. That envelope, heavy, expensive, engraved, had once felt like a promise. Now it felt like a setup, an invitation to hope issued only so they could watch it wither. I looked around my apartment. Every piece of it I had built myself. The framed degree on the wall from Wharton, the first place award in branding strategy from the national conference, the sleek bookshelf where my team's campaign sat proudly beside bestsellers. All of it the life I had carved out without their applause, without their help. And yet, one invitation had made me believe I was finally seen. I walked over to my closet, pulling out the navy blue dress I'd spent 2 weekends choosing. It was still in its garment bag, tags untouched. The sales associate had said it made me glow. I had smiled, thinking of Nolan's fiancée, how I would stand tall that day, offer a toast, make peace. I'd imagined being part of something, but I had misunderstood. I wasn't supposed to stand with them. I was meant to stay out of frame. I hung the dress back up slower this time, not with reverence, but realization. There had been signs, of course, always signs. The way family dinners turned silent when I walked in. How my achievements were met with flat nods while Nolan's every small success was paraded like a miracle. How my mother once introduced me at a party as the one who works in advertising or something. She couldn't even remember my title, but could recite Nolan's failed restaurant menu by heart. I remembered the weekend Nolan proposed. We were all at my parents' house. He stood in the living room and announced it like he was hosting the Oscars. Champagne glasses clinked. My mother cried. And when I raised my glass to toast them, he didn't even look in my direction. Still, I smiled. Because that's what you do when you're Elise Hartman, the responsible one, the too intense one, the one they always say is too much when what they really mean is too inconvenient to ignore. I had convinced myself I could earn a seat at the table if I just gave more. More time. More money. More silence. I had funded Nolan's second business attempt without asking for repayment. I had signed paperwork for the Lake Cottage loan when Dad's credit didn't qualify. And when they threw 4th of July parties, I always brought the extra cases of wine. I paid and waited for gratitude that never came. But this was different. This wasn't quiet exclusion, this was premeditated erasure. I opened my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I had been updating for years, one that listed every check I'd written for them, every transfer, every favor, line after line of numbers. Each one a moment I told myself, maybe this time they'll see me. They never did, and now I wasn't sure I wanted them to. I looked out the window at the street below New York, moving like it always did, too fast to care, too loud to pause. And yet in that chaos I found clarity. They didn't want me at that wedding. Fine. But I wasn't going to let them edit me out of my own life anymore. I took a breath slow and full and said the words aloud, not for them, but for me. I don't need their permission to matter. Tomorrow I would go to that house, not for revenge, not even for answers, but to tell the truth mine for once without fear. And I wasn't walking in as the forgotten daughter. I was walking in as the woman who remembered everything. The next morning I woke up before the sun. My apartment was still cloaked in gray light, the city outside murmuring faintly like it hadn't decided whether to rise or go back to sleep. I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee. I barely tasted, staring at the invitation once more. It still looked so beautiful, like something from a magazine shoot. Elegant, carefully planned, deceptive. The truth was, they'd been erasing me in small ways for years. This just made it official. As the sky turned blue behind the skyline, I opened a drawer in my home office and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed documents, copies of transfer statements, invoices, signed agreements. Every dollar I'd given my parents for emergency help. Every time I'd funded Nolan's ventures, his doomed food truck, his organic sock business, the restaurant that closed in 6 months. And there it was too, the deed to the Lake Cottage. Signed over to Hartman and Vale Holdings, my company, 3 years ago, when my parents were desperate to save Nolan's credit. They never told anyone that part. Instead, they let the family believe they'd heroically saved the cottage while I was just the selfish one living in the city, too busy with work to care about tradition. Tradition. That word had always made me bristle. In our family, it wasn't about values or connection. It was a weapon. A tool to remind me of my place, to excuse favoritism, to silence questions. And any time I challenged it, my mother would smile tight-lipped and say, "Don't make this uncomfortable, Elise," as if I was the problem for noticing the truth. But this time I wouldn't play the quiet role. I slipped the folder into my leather tote, added a printed copy of the invitation, and walked to my closet. I didn't grab the navy dress. I chose a simple black one, instead fitted, clean, assertive. It wasn't for them, it was for me. By noon, I was parked in front of my parents' Tudor-style house, the same one Nolan and I grew up in, where our family posed for photos on the front porch each Thanksgiving. I used to stare at those pictures, wondering why I always seemed slightly off to the side, never quite centered. Now I knew why. The front lawn was immaculate, the hedges sculpted to perfection. The house looked unchanged, but inside I was sure the story had already moved on without me. I walked up the brick steps, gripping the tote tighter with each one. My fingers brushed against the brass door knocker, but I didn't use it. Through the open bay window I could see them. My mother sitting with her legs crossed on the cream leather sofa, sipping something from a crystal flute. Nolan laughing, flipping through more wedding photos, his new wife beside him. And my father, stoic as ever, leaning back in his recliner with a paper in his hand like it was just another peaceful day. "Best decision we made," I heard Nolan say. "One perfect day without her." My heart didn't sink, it hardened. 3 minutes passed before my mother noticed me standing in the doorway. She blinked slowly, her glass now hidden behind a photo frame like it was part of a staged play. Elise, not a greeting, not even a question, just a recognition, like I was someone she wasn't expecting to see at a party she never invited me to. I stepped inside my heels, sharp against the hardwood. "The wedding was last weekend," I said evenly. "You sent me the wrong date, on purpose." Nolan didn't even glance up. I needed one perfect day without you, he said. Not an apology, not even cruel, just true, or at least true to him. You've always disrupted our peace, Elise, my mother said softly, adjusting her pearl necklace. Can't you understand we needed one day free of your intensity? I didn't flinch. Your silence was always more comfortable for everyone else, I replied. But I'm not here to be comfortable. I'm here to be seen. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. I placed the folder down on the glass coffee table between us with a quiet, deliberate motion. The same table I used to color on as a kid. The same table where holiday cards from relatives were once displayed, none of which ever had my name written first, if at all. My mother narrowed her eyes at the folder like it might explode. My father looked at it like he didn't see it at all. I've put thousands of dollars into the lake cottage over the last 8 years, I said. From my holding company. I covered repairs, taxes, renovations, everything. There was a pause. Then she laughed, small-practiced. That's what successful children do, she said with a wave of her hand. They help their family. It's your obligation, Elise. My brother smirked and threw the wedding album onto the table like it didn't matter anymore. Dad built something real, Nolan said. I create architectural visions. What do you make Elise besides money? That was it. That was all I was to them, a walking ATM with inconvenient emotions. A resource they didn't want to acknowledge unless it benefited them. What I make, I said slowly, is freedom. I stood straighter, meeting each of their eyes in turn. And that cottage, it doesn't belong to you anymore. You signed it over to Hartman and Vale Holdings 3 years ago. I have the deed, and the transfer agreement, and the tax records, everything. My mother blinked, once, twice. Her fingers tightened around her pearls. You wouldn't, she whispered. My father, still sunk into his recliner, finally spoke. We assumed once things got better, you'd just let it go, give it back. I raised an eyebrow. You assumed I'd keep giving while you pretended I never gave at all. I reached into the folder and slid the deed across the table. Your signature is right here, dated April 2018, right after Nolan's restaurant collapsed. They both stared at the document as if seeing it for the first time. Not because they didn't remember, because they never expected I'd bring the proof. You're welcome to contest it, I added, but my attorney already reviewed everything. She made sure it was airtight. Jenna, my mother's voice pitched higher. Jenna Morales, our family attorney. My attorney now, I said, for the past 5 years. That landed harder than any insult I could have thrown. My mother stood up half a step toward me, her voice shaking, not from grief, but control slipping through her fingers. You can't just take the cottage. You already gave it to me, I said. You just hoped I'd never realize how much I've already given. The silence that followed was deafening. For once, no one had a quick retort, no dismissive scoff, no tight-lipped smirk. And in that silence, I felt something strange. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Clarity. They never truly saw me, not when I graduated top of my class. Not when I bailed out Nolan's failing businesses. Not even when I saved the family's legacy home. They saw what I gave, but never who I was. And now they couldn't ignore me, not anymore. You built a family dynamic where I was always just outside the frame, I said. Well, I've stepped in now. And I'm taking back the parts of me you tried to erase. My mother's hands trembled. Why are you doing this now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Because I finally understand, I said, turning to leave, that I don't owe you peace for the war you kept pretending wasn't happening. And as I walked toward the door past the framed wedding photos, I was never in. I added without looking back. Tomorrow morning, legal papers will be filed. You'll have 30 days to vacate the lake cottage. No screams followed, no tears. Just the stillness of people who had run out of excuses. And for the first time in years, I walked away without apology. Without shrinking, without asking to be loved, just walking whole, unapologetic, free. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft hush muffling whatever final words my mother might have whispered as I left their house. But I didn't look back. Not this time. The ride down felt endless and weightless all at once, like gravity itself wasn't sure whether to hold me anymore. When I stepped back into the sunlit world outside, a strange stillness settled inside me. Not peace, not yet, but something quieter than rage. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the wedding invitation still lying on the passenger seat. Its calligraphy looked elegant, dignified, like a thing meant for celebration. But to me now, it felt like a weapon dipped in gold leaf. One perfect day without you. Nolan's words played again in my mind. Not screamed, not thrown like a tantrum, just said plainly as if my presence was inherently a problem to solve. They didn't just want me absent, they wanted a world where I'd never existed in the first place. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at my rearview mirror, not at the house, but at myself. The reflection looking back didn't resemble the woman I'd been even 2 days ago. Her shoulders were squared, her jaw steady. Her eyes didn't search for approval anymore. And yet I still had questions that haunted me. Why wasn't I enough? Why had I been the one they could cut out so easily? I didn't need the answers, I just needed to stop asking. Later that night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. I'd taken off my earrings, my shoes, even my jacket. And I just stared. At myself. The curve of my shoulders, the shadows beneath my eyes. The posture I'd trained for years to shrink to quiet, to smile even when it hurt. They don't get to shape me anymore, I said aloud. The words felt raw, like carving something out of stone. I walked into my home office, turned on the desk lamp, and opened my laptop. I pulled up my financial software, logged in, and began the next task, closing every remaining joint account I had with my family. Savings accounts I'd helped them manage. Investment funds I'd once shared with Nolan in hopes of bringing us closer. Even the credit card I let my parents use just in case, which they'd used plenty. Click, close, confirm. Click, revoke access, confirm. One by one, the digital tethers they used to keep me entangled snapped. And with each click, I felt myself inching back into ownership of my money, my boundaries, myself. Just as I was about to shut the laptop, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but something told me to answer. Elise, the voice was shaky, hesitant. Yes, I replied cautiously. It's Kendra, Nolan's wife. My throat tightened involuntarily. I stepped into the kitchen, flicked on a light, and leaned against the counter. What do you want? I asked. I saw everything she said. At the house. The way they spoke to you. I didn't know. I didn't know they could be like that. Silence stretched. He told me you refused to help with the wedding, she continued. That you were jealous. That you made things harder. I didn't respond. But now I know, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions. I closed my eyes. There it was, that tiny flicker. A chance to connect. Or a trap. Why are you telling me this? I asked, voice firm. Because I recognized that look, she said. The one Nolan had today. It's the same look my dad had when he hurt my mom, and I waited years before saying anything. I'm not doing that again. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if this was the beginning of a bridge, or another deception waiting to collapse. But somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Not trust, but room. Room for possibility. And if you've ever stood at the edge of choosing whether to let someone back in or keep the wall up forever, tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the hardest decision isn't walking away. It's deciding who, if anyone, gets to walk in with you. If this story is resonating with something inside you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from pieces no one saw break, stay with me. There's more ahead, and what comes next will change everything. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Jenna Morales, my attorney, in the small but tastefully furnished conference room at her Midtown office. She wore her usual navy blue blazer, gold-rimmed glasses, and an expression that always balanced between kindness and unshakable precision. Across the table between us were 3 folders, all labeled in her neat slanted handwriting: Lake Cottage title and tax documentation, family loan history, and restraining order preparation. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to build a wall, one of paper, ink, and law. A wall between myself and the people who had for so long mistaken my silence for submission. Jenna opened the first folder and scanned its contents. Their signatures are clean, notarized, dated. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. I nodded. Good. She looked up, tilting her head. You okay? I paused before answering. I think I'm becoming okay. As she began assembling a packet of final documents for the county clerk, I glanced out the window at the city skyline. The sun had broken through the gray clouds, scattering warm light across the polished table. For once, it felt symbolic instead of accidental. The intercom buzzed. Jenna's assistant leaned in through the door. Miss Morales, Mr. Bedford from Financial Strategy is here. Moments later, Thomas Bedford entered, a seasoned financial advisor with silver hair, an elegant tie, and a demeanor that said, I've seen more betrayal inside family estates than in divorce court. He took a seat beside me, nodding in quiet solidarity. We reviewed my investment portfolios, trust contributions, and family-linked accounts. Then came the final phase removal of all co-signatures, shared liabilities, and access rights. Let's finalize the account terminations today, I told him. No more waiting. He glanced at the clock. Perfect timing. If we move now, your parents should be halfway through their weekly country club lunch. It'll be done before they've ordered dessert. There was something deeply satisfying in that. Not petty, just poetic. And the restraining order, I asked. Jenna tapped her pen on the folder. Judge Harriman is reviewing it this afternoon. The documentation is thorough. Unannounced visits, verbal hostility, workplace interference, all patterns we can demonstrate clearly. My chest tightened at the word pattern, because that's exactly what it had been. Not isolated incidents, not misunderstandings. A pattern, a system, a long, quiet campaign to keep me small, compliant, grateful. You're making the right choice, Thomas said. I've seen families destroy people. You're stopping that from happening. Just as he finished speaking, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Miss Hartman, this is building security. There's a situation in the lobby. Your brother is here. He's demanding to see you. I felt Jenna and Thomas both stiffen in their seats. Is he creating a disturbance? I asked calmly. Yes, ma'am. He's shouting about family business and what she owes. We're documenting everything as part of security protocol. Thomas scribbled something on a post-it and passed it to me. This strengthens the restraining order case. I exhaled slowly. I'm not coming down. Please follow standard procedures for unauthorized visitors. Understood, ma'am. We'll escort him out shortly. When the call ended, Thomas leaned back in his chair. I've worked with hedge fund founders less composed than you, he said. I gave a small smile. It's not composure, it's clarity. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't confused about who they were or who I was. I wasn't spinning in mental circles, questioning if I was overreacting or imagining things. I saw it, all of it, and now I had the documents to prove it. If you've ever been called dramatic just for telling the truth, if you've ever been made to feel too much just for asking to be treated with respect, share your story below. Because it's not overreacting when it's finally enough. And as I sat there watching Jenna assemble the last of the legal papers, I realized I wasn't building a wall to shut them out. I was building a fortress to finally stand in. Later that afternoon, as sunlight slanted through my office windows, my phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen wasn't a stranger, it was Kendra Nolan's wife. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Part of me expected tears or accusations or worse, manipulation wrapped in apology. But when I answered, her voice was quiet, measured. Elise, I'm outside your building. I stood slowly walking to the window. Sure enough, there she was standing by the front fountain, arms wrapped around herself, phone pressed to her cheek. Her posture was different today, guarded, uncertain, like someone finally questioning everything they thought they knew. I saw what happened earlier, she continued. Your brother, he caused a scene in your lobby. I'm sorry. I didn't speak. I didn't know what to say. He told me you refused to help with the wedding, that you were cold, jealous, but that wasn't true, was it? My silence was answer enough. You didn't even know when the wedding was. The line between us was quiet for a long time, only the hum of wind bleeding through. I leaned a hand against the glass, watching her. She looked so young, only a few years younger than me, but somehow untouched by the weathering I'd carried for years. Why are you telling me this? I asked carefully. Because I recognized the look in Nolan's eyes today, she said. It was the same look my father had before my mom left him. I spent my childhood watching her shrink to nothing. I promised myself I wouldn't repeat that. But then, today, I saw myself standing in her shoes. Another pause. She brushed hair from her cheek. The sunlight caught her wedding ring glimmering, unbothered by the storm brewing beneath it. I think you know better than anyone what that feels like. I swallowed hard. Was this a trap or a chance? Kendra continued, her voice growing stronger. I don't want to become someone who makes excuses for the person hurting me. I don't know what to do next. A moment passed. Then I said the only thing I could say, start by telling the truth, especially to yourself. She nodded slowly. I want to understand what really happened, with the cottage, the money, all of it. Then come by tomorrow, I said. We'll talk, on my terms. Thank you, she whispered, truly. When I hung up, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. But there was space. A little less pressure behind my ribs. A little more air in the room. I sat down at my desk and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, letters, little pieces of family, some real, some fiction I'd convinced myself to believe. I picked up one of my mother's Christmas cards. On the cover, a staged photo of the entire family at the cottage. My father holding a mug, Nolan standing tall in front, my mother radiant in her red scarf, and me, crooked, off to the side, half cut by the edge of the frame. They'd mailed it to me with a sticky note that read, "Wish you were here." I had hung it on my fridge that year. Because I still believed the lie. Not anymore. I took the card and dropped it into the shredder. If you've ever spent holidays wondering if anyone truly missed you, if you've smiled through the sting of wish you were here when you were never invited, let yourself feel it. Then let it go. At the end of the day, silence is not kindness. And pretending to be part of a family that only tolerates your presence, that's not love, that's exile. If you're still reading, maybe you're someone who's been on the outside looking in too long. You deserve more than pity wrapped in tradition. And you are not alone. Please leave a comment if you've ever been cropped out of the frame, literally or metaphorically. And if this story is helping you find your own voice, I hope you'll subscribe. Not just to the channel, but to the truth inside you. Because we still have a long way to go. And I promise what comes next. It's not survival, it's reclamation. The next day, just before noon, Aunt Maxine arrived at my office with a leather briefcase I'd never seen her carry before. It was weathered, the edges worn smooth by time and handling. She walked in without preamble, without any trace of her usual gentle hesitations. "I've been keeping these for years," she said, setting the case down on my desk. She opened it carefully, almost reverently. Inside were neatly organized folders bound with labeled tabs: 2014 tax receipts, cottage repairs family group, text logs, emails, financial. Her hands didn't tremble when she flipped them open, only steadied. "Your mother never deleted anything," she said with a small, humorless smile. She thought she might need leverage one day. I stared at the papers. Emails asking me to help with Nolan's credit line, just temporary. Text messages telling me don't mention the new car we told Elise, things were tight. Bank transfers for urgent home repairs that were followed by receipts for vacations to Aruba. And worst of all, handwritten notes from my mother to my father. "If she asks again, remind her how much we sacrificed. She'll back off, she always does." Every page felt like a betrayal I had once suspected but never dared to confirm. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd calculated it, covered it, shared the weight of it. "You were never crazy," Maxine said softly. "They wanted you to feel alone so you wouldn't question anything." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. This wasn't grief, this was confirmation. Why now, I asked her. "Because it's finally safe," she answered. "Because you stopped trying to earn their kindness?" I nodded, pulling several key emails and placing them in a folder for Jenna. These weren't just emotional evidence, they were legal ammunition. Jenna arrived minutes later, heels clicking confidently as she entered. "You're not going to believe this," I said, holding up the pile. She skimmed the first few lines and smiled grimly. "This strengthens our position on cottage ownership considerably. This isn't neglect, this is patterned financial exploitation." Thomas joined us shortly after with news additional security layers had been installed on all my accounts, both personal and professional. No one, not even with my mother's flair for information gathering, could touch a cent. The four of us sat around the table, a strange little war room of sorts, Jenna reviewing legal recourse, Thomas refining the portfolio, split Aunt Maxine handing over years of evidence like a secret agent finally defecting. And me, calm, composed, exhausted. "They won't stop here," I said. "They're losing control." Jenna nodded. "Which is why we're filing for a protective court order today. This isn't just about property anymore. It's about personal safety and harassment boundaries." Maxine reached for my hand. Her touch was light but grounding. "You've been standing alone in this for a long time. But you're not alone anymore." I looked at her, this woman who had stayed mostly silent for so long, who'd quietly disagreed with my mother but never interfered until now. "Why did you never say anything before?" I whispered. "Because I thought you still wanted them to love you, and I didn't want to take that away from you." Her words struck something inside me, because she was right. For years, I would have rather held on to the illusion of family than face the emptiness behind it. I had stayed quiet, compliant, useful, always hoping they'd choose to see me. They never did. But now I had the truth, I had allies, I had proof. And I had me. If you've ever lived in the shadow of manipulation disguised as tradition, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive for reacting to cruelty, know this. You are not too much, you are not alone, and you are not wrong for wanting more. Let me know in the comments, what was the moment you finally said enough? Because sometimes the greatest rebellion isn't slamming the door. It's calmly locking it from the inside and throwing away the key. By the time I got home that evening, the folders were tucked safely in my desk drawer, each document filed, time-stamped, and categorized. I hadn't even turned on the lights. The dusk spilled through my windows, bathing the living room in soft gold. I sat at the edge of my couch and stared ahead, not really seeing anything, just feeling everything. A day ago I had believed I was prepared. But nothing prepares you for the realization that your family never wanted you strong. They wanted you compliant, predictable, useful. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Jenna standing there, briefcase in hand, face unreadable. "You might want to sit down," she said. Inside, she set down her case and pulled out a thick envelope. "The judge granted your restraining order," she said. "It's official as of 2:14 p.m. today. They cannot come within 500 feet of your home or office." I blinked. "That fast?" She nodded. The judge cited a clear pattern of emotional and financial harassment. His words, not mine. I exhaled a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. "It's done then," I murmured. "The legal part, yes. The emotional part, that takes time." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Aunt Maxine. "Your cousin Rebecca canceled her bridge game with your mother," she said. "Told her she couldn't look her in the eye after what she did to you." I closed my eyes. One by one, the dominoes were falling. Uncle Stephen removed my parents from the holiday rotation. Grandma's oldest friend rescinded her dinner invitation. Nolan's drinking had escalated. And from what I heard, Kendra had moved back in with her parents, her wedding dress still hanging in a dry cleaner's bag by the front door. It wasn't vengeance, it was consequence. And I didn't gloat. I didn't dance in their collapse. But I did observe, like watching a storm you tried to warn people about finally arrive. The next morning, a certified envelope appeared in my mail slot. My father's handwriting on the label was unmistakable, each letter tall, dramatic, sharp. Inside was a formal letter printed on his company's stationery. To Elise Hartman. "We demand the immediate return of the lake cottage to its rightful owners. Your mother and I were not fully informed regarding the legal implications of the deed transfer and consider the current status invalid." I laughed aloud for the first time in days. There it was, their true face scrubbed clean of tears and sentiment. When control slipped away, they reverted to form threats cloaked in dignity. I tucked the letter beneath a stack of pending legal notices, right next to a framed photo of the cottage taken the summer I'd paid to have its roof redone after a hailstorm. No one had thanked me for that. No one ever had. But this wasn't about thanks anymore. That night, I lay in bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. I scrolled through hundreds of photos, weddings, holidays, dinners, smiling faces, matching sweaters, elaborate centerpieces, all things I'd thought meant family. But what caught my eye was the space, the empty chairs, the photos where I stood a little too far to the side, the pictures I remembered being in but couldn't find myself. Had I ever really belonged? I whispered. At 3 a.m., I opened a blank spreadsheet and began typing. Every check I wrote, every transaction I covered, every financial bandage I applied while they smiled for Christmas cards. I wrote and wrote and wrote, not to prove them wrong, but to prove me right. If you've ever stayed up at night trying to calculate your worth in dollars and deeds just to feel like you belonged, you're not alone. And you don't have to keep the receipts to justify your value. Still, sometimes writing them down helps. Tell me in the comments, what's one thing you gave that no one ever acknowledged? Not because you need validation, but because this time someone's actually listening. And that someone might finally be you. Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in that same spreadsheet line, 73 if I remember correctly, detailing a $4 $500 loan. Nolan forgot to repay after his second business failure when a knock sounded on my office door. It wasn't the usual assistant knock, it was softer, familiar. I looked up. Aunt Maxine stood in the doorway holding 2 brown paper bags and a tired smile. "Thought you might be skipping lunch again," she said, stepping inside. She placed the bags on my desk and began unpacking them. 1 sandwich from my favorite deli, a small bag of kettle chips, and a bottle of sparkling water with lime. Her usual care package. "Roasted turkey on whole grain, no tomato," she said. "Still your order." I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. She sat beside me, not across the desk, but next to me like she used to during the summer I spent at her cabin when things got bad at home. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was familiar healing. "I'm proud of you, Elise," she said finally, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "It's about time someone in this family had courage." I exhaled slowly. Her words, simple as they were, nearly undid me. I wasn't used to praise that didn't have strings attached. Before I could respond, the intercom crackled. Miss Hartman, your parents are in the lobby. No appointment. Maxine's hand tensed slightly on my shoulder. Would you like me to stay? I shook my head. No, I need to handle this myself. She gave a small nod and walked out, pausing at the door. Remember who you are. When my parents entered, they looked diminished. My mother's usually pristine coat hung unevenly off one shoulder, and her perfectly curled hair had unraveled slightly. My father's posture had changed too, less authoritative, more unsure. For the first time in my life, they didn't fill the room. They floated in it. Elise, my mother said softly, eyes misted. How could you abandon your family like this? We've always been there for you. I sat still behind my desk, spine, straight hands calmly folded on the surface. I didn't stand. I didn't rise to meet their presence. Not anymore. The cottage has been in our family for generations. My father added his voice a few tones below its usual command. You have no right to take that away. I met his eyes. That cottage hasn't belonged to you in 3 years. You sold your half to my company to fund Nolan's last restaurant. April 2018. You both signed the transfer documents. I have them. My mother's expression hardened. We did no such thing. I opened the top drawer, removed a manila envelope, and laid it on the desk between us. I didn't push it across dramatically. I didn't need to. Your signature is right there, Mother, and yours, Dad. Witnessed, notarized, filed. Silence. And then the unraveling. We assumed once things turned around, we'd revisit the ownership. My father said, his words flimsy even to himself. You assumed I'd keep funding this family like I always have, I replied. You assumed I'd keep giving while being erased. Well, I'm done. For a moment, my mother looked stunned, like she couldn't comprehend a world in which I refused to play the role she'd written for me. And then, fear. For the first time in my life, she looked at me not with disappointment, but with fear. I almost pitied her. Almost. The intercom buzzed again. Miss Hartman, Jenna Morales is here for your 2 o'clock. Perfect timing. Jenna entered crisp and focused as ever. She glanced at my parents, then turned to me. Mr. and Mrs. Hartman, I believe our meeting is concluded. My mother sputtered. This is family business. Which is why my attorney is handling it, I said smoothly. All future communication goes through her office. Jenna gestured to the door, calm and professional. My parents hesitated, stunned. As they turned to leave, my father looked back confused, maybe even wounded. But I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I didn't stand. If you've ever been expected to keep giving while being quietly erased, comment below. Let me know I'm not alone. Because when silence is expected, choosing to speak becomes an act of power. And when you're no longer willing to shrink, even the strongest guilt begins to crack. If this part of the story speaks to you, hit subscribe. Let's write the rest of this story together. Because from here forward, the chapters belong to me. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, Jenna and I sat in silence. She pulled out a folder, thumbing through freshly signed legal notices. Her composure never wavered, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward as she organized the papers. Your mother's signature is ironclad, she said, slipping one document into a labeled envelope. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. I stared at the line where my mother's name curled in its usual dramatic flourish, years of weaponized handwriting, now rendered powerless by the very ink she once used to control. Jenna slid over one final document. This one gives them 30 days to vacate the lake cottage. You're not just reclaiming the property, Elise. You're reclaiming space. I picked up the pen and signed. Deliberate, clean, no hesitation. Just as I dotted the last letter of my name, my phone vibrated again. Nolan. His name flashed across the screen for the first time in over a year. My fingers hovered over the phone, instinct tugging at me, decades of conditioned response rising like a tide. But I didn't pick up. Not this time. Some calls don't deserve to be answered. I turned the phone face down and looked at Jenna. Let's move forward with the rest, I said. The next morning, I found myself sitting in Thomas Bedford's office again. He greeted me with his usual calm demeanor, and a thick stack of forms papers I'd long avoided, thinking signing them would mean turning my back on family. Now I saw them for what they were, freedom papers. We began with the joint accounts. This closes the last of the co-managed credit lines, he said, scratching out my father's name with a slow, satisfying swipe. Your mother won't have access to the business card anymore either. Then the co-signed loans, small business ventures I had foolishly backed in my 20s, hoping to earn some affection. Gone, Thomas confirmed, flipping to the next tab, clean cut. By the time we reached the investment portfolios, I had signed more than a dozen forms, my signature growing more confident with each pass. According to their habits, Thomas said, checking his watch, Your parents should be halfway through their usual Thursday country club luncheon. That timing worked out beautifully. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I don't even want to know what they're saying about me. Probably nothing they wouldn't say to your face, he said dryly. Only difference is, now it doesn't matter. We moved to the restraining order documentation. Judge Harriman is fast-tracking it, Thomas said. Your brother's outburst in the lobby yesterday, combined with years of documented harassment, gives us everything we need. If they step foot near you, it's a legal violation. I nodded. Let's file it all. He handed me the final form. This is the formal affidavit of emotional and financial harm. It will be part of the public record. I hesitated only for a second, then I signed. As the ink dried, my phone rang again, this time from the building security desk. Miss Hartman, the officer said your brother is in the lobby again. He's demanding to speak with you about financial matters. We've already initiated documentation per your security protocol. My hands curled into fists beneath the desk. He's quite insistent, the guard added, causing a scene. Thomas didn't miss a beat. This strengthens the case for the restraining order. I lifted the receiver. I'm not coming down. Please treat him as an unauthorized visitor and follow standard procedure. Understood, ma'am. When I hung up, I looked out the office window. The sky was clear sun gleaming off glass towers like a city reborn. The view was the same, but I wasn't. If you've ever had to choose between your own sanity and your family's expectations, let me know in the comments. Because there comes a point when the cost of loyalty outweighs the price of liberation. And some bloodlines don't deserve access to your peace. If you've made it this far in the story, drop a like, leave your thoughts, or just say, I'm still here. Because sometimes knowing someone else has walked through the fire and lived is all it takes to keep walking. And this is only the halfway point. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, a name flashed across my phone screen that made my chest tighten. Kendra. I hesitated for a long second before answering. Elise, she said, her voice breathy, tentative. I know you said tomorrow, but I had to call. I didn't know who else to talk to. I moved to the window, watching the golden haze blur the outlines of the skyline. Nolan came home today and screamed at me for 20 minutes straight, she said, her voice trembling. He said you'd ruined everything, that I betrayed him just by talking to you. I stayed silent, giving her space. I left, she added. I packed a bag and drove to my parents' place. I couldn't stay. Not after seeing the way he talked about you, the way he lied. There was a pause, then the words came fast, like someone finally opening a sealed room. He told me you were controlling, that you manipulated the family, that you always played victim. And I believed him, because I didn't know any better. But now, after what I've seen, the way they cornered you, the way he acts when no one's watching. Her voice cracked. I just needed to say I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I exhaled slowly. You don't owe me an apology, Kendra, I said. You owe yourself the truth. You're doing the hard part now, choosing what to see. Do you think, she asked softly, that someone like Nolan can change? I didn't hesitate. No. Because change requires ownership. It requires breaking the pattern, not defending it. And Nolan had spent years making himself the center of every story, even the ones that weren't his. But you, I added, you still can. After we hung up, I sat back at my desk staring at the ceiling. The ache in my chest wasn't grief anymore. It was space. The kind of space that opens up when a door long jammed finally swings wide. I reached for a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside, a stack of unopened letters from my father. Dozens. Some postmarked as far back as 2 years ago. Most came after I began to withdraw, each one a different tactic. Some sweet, some bitter. All scripted from the same belief that I could be guilted back into silence. I pulled the latest one from the top. Heavy cream paper, his unmistakable lettering. I didn't open it. Instead, I placed it next to the rest, neatly tucked into a wooden box. Not as keepsakes, not as wounds, but as evidence of what I survived. Beside that box sat a brochure I'd picked up the week before, a mentorship program for young women entering high-pressure industries. And beneath it, my itinerary for a solo trip to Portugal, a journey I had postponed twice out of obligation. But this time, no one was asking me to stay. No one had the power to. At that moment, Jenna texted, "Restraining order confirmed. Court ruling stands. They're officially blocked from contact." I read it twice, then again. Final, legal, complete. Outside my window, the sky turned from gold to deep blue. Lights blinked on in apartments across the skyline. Somewhere out there, families were gathering for dinner. Others were unraveling behind closed doors. But me, I was sitting in a space I had carved out for myself, a life no longer negotiated through guilt. If you've ever had to turn down the volume on your past just to hear your own voice, if you've ever built peace brick by brick because no one gave it to you, tell me below what's one thing you've reclaimed. Because this part of the story, this silence, it's not emptiness, it's yours. And in that quiet, something finally blooms. Like, comment, and share this video if this chapter speaks to a piece of you you've been afraid to name. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. And you're doing it on your terms. 1 week later, I stood by the tall windows of my lake house office, coffee mug in hand, watching sunlight glitter across the water. The mornings were quiet out here, no phones ringing, no city traffic humming beneath my window, no tense conversations muffled behind thin apartment walls. Just wind in the trees, just me breathing without bracing. The house, once a symbol of obligation and invisible strings, had become something else entirely. Mine. Not just in deed and paperwork, but in feeling. I'd redecorated the office, removed the dusty antiques my mother once insisted gave the cottage charm, and replaced them with shelves filled with my favorite novels, photography prints from my travels, and a framed certificate from my company's most successful campaign. The space no longer whispered, "You owe us." It now echoed, "You built this." The knock at the door was gentle, almost hesitant. When I opened it, Jenna stood on the porch, flanked by Thomas and Aunt Maxine. She held a bottle of white wine. Maxine carried her famous apple crumble in a foil-covered dish. Thomas offered a warm smile and a simple question. "We still invited?" I stepped aside, grinning for the first time in what felt like years, always. Inside, we set the table. No silver polished for show, no awkward silences over roast beef, no calculating glances from across linen napkins. Just wine stories, and the kind of laughter that bubbled from deep in the chest, the rusty kind that meant healing had taken root. After dinner, we sat on the back porch, watching the sky turn sherbet orange. Thomas leaned back in his chair and raised his glass. "To 1 year," he said. 1 year of boundaries stronger than granite. "To the family we choose," Maxine added, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "And to the woman who finally stopped asking permission to take up space," Jenna finished. Our glasses clinked. Later, after they left, I returned to my office. I lit a candle on the desk, lavender and cedar, and pulled out the most recent letter from my father. The envelope was thinner this time. No bold accusations. No veiled threats. Just a simple message written in his neat script. "Elise, I failed you. You deserved better, Dad." No demands, no apologies soaked in conditions. Just 7 words that didn't beg for forgiveness, only acknowledged harm. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box alongside the others. Not with resentment, not with hope. Just closure. I ran my fingers across the lid, then reached for the brochure I'd printed earlier that week, Women Reclaiming Power, a speaker series for mentors in business. My name had been added to the docket. I would be delivering a keynote in 3 months. And beneath it, tucked beneath my itinerary to Portugal, was a list of nonprofit organizations that helped women navigate family estrangement, inheritance disputes, and financial coercion. I'd circled 3. I wasn't done. I wasn't hiding. I was beginning. If you've ever felt like you had to earn your family's love with silence, success, or sacrifice, write your name in the comments below. Because we name ourselves now. We claim our own space now, and the legacy we build isn't made of guilt, it's made of choice. If this story lit something in you, something old, something quiet, something that's been waiting to speak, subscribe. We're not rewriting the past. We're building a future where people like us don't apologize for taking up room. And that starts here. That starts now. That starts with you. 2 weeks later, I walked into a small community hall in San Diego, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows faced a modest stage where a simple banner read, "Owning your story, breaking cycles, building legacies." I wasn't here to speak first. I came early to listen. A woman named Carla stood on stage, voice shaking, but eyes strong. She told the room about growing up in a family where her mother stole her credit, where her accomplishments were claimed by her brother, and her pain was always too much. Her voice wavered when she spoke of the moment she left bags packed, heart shattered, but she stood taller as she shared how she built her business from scratch, got her degree at 38, and cut ties with anyone who said she was too sensitive. The audience applauded, some stood. I did too. Because even though the details were different, I knew her silence. I knew that ache in the gut when you walk away from everything familiar and still wonder if maybe you were the one who messed it all up. That day I spoke second. I told them my name, told them about the lake house, about the Sunday dinners where I was always the afterthought even when I was the one who'd paid for the meal. I shared the story about the envelope, the one with my name on it handed to me like a receipt for a lifetime of being second best. But then I shifted. I told them about the quiet joy of buying sheets for my bed, not one I was guilted into giving up. I told them how I laughed again, not the polite, curated kind, but the raw, belly-deep kind you feel the next morning in your ribs. I told them about my niece, who now calls me just to talk, not to ask for something. I told them about the little box where I keep my father's letter, not because I want to forgive him, but because I wanted proof that even the most controlling voices can one day run out of things to say. And somewhere between the laughs and the pauses, I saw people nod, cry, exhale. And that's when I knew my story wasn't rare, it was common. But what made it powerful wasn't the pain, it was the reclaiming. After the event, a young woman named Leah approached me. She looked barely 25, maybe younger, and her fingers trembled as she held out her phone. "I recorded your part," she said softly. "I needed to, because I think you just saved me from making a mistake I wouldn't come back from." Her voice cracked. I was going to go back home, try to fix it, again. I reached out, took her hand, and said the words I wish someone had told me at her age. "You are not the fixer of what they broke." She cried into my shoulder, and for a moment I felt the weight of generations shift just a little. Because that's how it starts, not always with rage or lawsuits or slamming doors. Sometimes it starts in a community hall, with a mic, and a story that sounds just like yours. If you're still carrying stories that weren't yours to begin with, let this be the moment you set them down. Let this be the first breath of a life that's actually yours. And if this moment stirred something inside you, if you've ever wished someone had stood up and said what you couldn't, then let this be your sign. Drop a comment, share your story, let someone know they're not alone. Because we're stronger when we say it out loud. And healing, my friend, doesn't whisper, it roars. My name is Vanessa Clark. And the last time I saw my family, they were standing behind a locked gate, yelling that I was dramatic, that I was destroying this family, that I was just like your grandmother, selfish and cold. I didn't yell back, I didn't cry. I simply turned key in hand and drove away from a house I used to call home. Because what they never realized was, I wasn't trying to destroy the family. I was saving myself from one. And sometimes those two things look the same. In the months that followed, I built a new rhythm. There were quiet mornings with coffee and music that only I liked. Sunday nights without guilt trips or phone calls demanding favors. Holidays spent in bookstores or hiking trails instead of dining rooms filled with forced smiles and passive-aggressive toasts. But the most unexpected part, peace didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like relief. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because I was done patching up things that should have been rebuilt by those who broke them. I launched my small marketing agency. No one could take credit this time. No one could claim it was because of them. Every client, every contract, every late-night brainstorm session mine. And yet the old ghost still knocked. One night around Thanksgiving, I got a text from my mother. "We'll be having dinner at 5. You're welcome if you've come to your senses." I stared at the screen. No apology, no accountability, just that same invisible leash masked as an invitation. And I did what I had never done before. I didn't respond. Because healing isn't about burning bridges. It's about learning you never had to cross them to begin with. Instead, I baked a pie badly. It burned. The crust crumbled. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Then I called my neighbor Ms. Ramirez, who lost her son last year and spent most holidays alone. We shared pizza on her porch, wrapped in blankets, trading memories like childhood secrets. That night, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. A few weeks later, I got a certified letter from my parents' lawyer. They were suing me, apparently for mental distress and property contributions to the house they never paid me a cent for. I didn't panic. I forwarded it to my attorney, a kind woman who'd once walked out on her own family at 27 and never looked back. "They're trying to scare you," she said. "But this time, they're the ones who will be disappointed." The lawsuit was dismissed within weeks. No merit, no evidence, just noise. But it was the last gasp of a system that had thrived on my silence. And now I was loud. So here I am, telling my story not for revenge, not for pity, but because I know someone out there is sitting on a bathroom floor right now, phone in hand, wondering if walking away makes them a bad daughter, a terrible son, an ungrateful sibling. Let me say this clearly. Choosing peace over obligation is not betrayal. Protecting your sanity is not selfish. And building your own life, one brick at a time, is not abandonment, it's courage. And if you've made it to this point in my story, thank you. Thank you for walking this road with me. If you see pieces of yourself in these words, if your heart ached or your chest tightened, maybe it's time to write the next chapter of your story one, where you stop asking for permission to be whole. If this spoke to you, if even one moment echoed in your soul, drop a comment. Let me know you're out there. Subscribe to this channel not just for me, but for every voice that's been told to stay silent. Let's rewrite what family means. Let's choose ourselves loudly, bravely, unapologetically. And if you're ready to stand with me, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning. There's a strange kind of silence that follows after you've walked away from people who were supposed to love you right. It's not loud like a door slam, it's not violent like a scream, it's just still. And in that stillness, I discovered something I had never truly felt before: freedom. Not the freedom to travel or spend money or say what I want online, but the deeper kind. The freedom to exist without having to explain. To breathe without waiting for judgment. To love myself without asking permission. For the longest time, I thought I had to earn kindness from my own family. That maybe if I were more patient, more giving, more obedient, they'd see me, choose me, treat me better. But here's what I know now. You don't owe people a version of yourself that bleeds to keep them comfortable. Family should never be a battlefield. Love should never require silence. And healing. It doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means learning how to live even though it did. So if you've made it here to this quiet ending of my story, maybe it's because you're carrying your own. Maybe it's time you put it down. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that feels like yours. And no matter how long it takes, you are allowed to begin again. If this journey meant something to you, share your story in the comments so someone else knows they're not alone. And if you're ready to walk forward, hit subscribe and let's keep walking together. Because the truth is, we're not broken. We were just brave enough to leave.